Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you here this morning. We have Cindy Powell from the Rocky Mountain ADA here to talk about those type of issues, and so I'm excited to hear her speak this morning. One of my staff heard her speak recently and said she was absolutely incredible and learned a lot from it, so thank you for coming this morning.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I absolutely adore the PPLD staff. I worked a lot with the diversity team. I don't know if they're still in existence. And then the last time I was here, I talked about service animals, and we're definitely going to review service animals during this presentation, since there were some big changes that occurred in the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that became effective on March 15th of 2011. So we're going to review service animals again. That's the most frequent calls I get from PPLDs, from the security department, when people are trying to bring in their service cat or their service bird, and the law clearly states dog. Yeah, so except we'll talk about the one exception a little later. Okay, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about our company's name is Meeting the Challenge, and we've been around since 1990. That's the same year that the Americans with Disabilities Act passed on July 26th of 1990. So as of 1991, the National Institute on Disability Rehabilitation and Research mandated 10 regional ADA centers. So that's the majority of what we do, is operating Rocky Mountain ADA Center, which serves Federal Region 8, which is Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. However, our parent company does quite a bit of things as well. We create a lot of disability-specific materials, and everything that I listed in your PowerPoint as resources, I brought copies of there, which PPLD will have, complimentary copies. We do focus on the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we know a lot about the other disability laws. The ADA is only one of many laws that affects people with disabilities. And so we talk to people about the other disability laws. We have a consulting department who's busy all the time for Meeting the Challenge. We go and do accessibility audits and ADA transition plans and that kind of thing for government programs and for private businesses. Okay. Another thing we do is sign language instruction, and I do a really intensive 4-hour workshop, and I teach people everything they need to know to continue to learn signs on their own. It's a really intensive workshop. I talk about the different hand shapes that are used in manual communication and the rules, and also talk about, I'm having a senior moment here, it's kind of early. But anyways, for a flat fee, we can come and teach a large group of people everything they need to know to continue to learn on their own, the phrases, the rules, and the hand shapes. And we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so I did talk about how we serve Federal Region 8. Anywhere in the country, when you call 1-800-949-4232, it's going to ring at your regional ADA office. So if you were in Butte, Montana, and you had an ADA question, that call would go ahead and ring here. The major thing that we do is technical assistance. Like I said, that phone rings all day, we answer questions. The most frequent call that we get are from doctors and dentists' offices not wanting to pay for sign language interpreters. So we talk to them about their effective communication requirements under the ADA. We talk to architects about universal design. We talk about service animal issues. A lot of the calls we get are from employers asking about reasonable accommodations in the workplace. And we also get calls from people with disabilities who feel they've been discriminated against in the workplace. Those are the major calls that we receive. We have people with disabilities calling us every day talking about how they've been discriminated against in housing situations. So we talk to them about how the ADA doesn't cover residential housing. That's the Fair Housing Act. Or we'll have a call from somebody saying that their service animal wasn't permitted on an airplane. That's the Air Carrier Access Act. So we talk to people about their rights and obligations under the ADA. We're really familiar with our 6-state regions, so we're able to give appropriate referrals when people call, and it's not an ADA issue. And every training that we present is customized to the group. They put in a training request on our website. tell us how many people, what they would like covered, and the location. So basically, that's what we do at our Rocky Mountain ADA Center portion of Meeting the Challenge. Okay? We always start our presentations with a disclaimer. We're not attorneys, we're not an enforcement or advocacy agency. Our role at Rocky Mountain ADA Center is to provide informal guidance on the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, so we're going to talk about prevalence of disability. We're going to talk about some real basic etiquette, and we're going to review service animals once again, and then resources. That's what we're going to cover today. I think we have plenty of time since I've been given an hour and a half for Q&A afterwards, so I'm happy to stay as long as I need to. Okay, next. Okay, true or false? The largest minority group in the United States are people with disabilities. That's true, okay? If we can go on to the next slide. I'm so used to that 54 million figure. Just last week we got the new statistics, and now they're saying 56.7 million people with disabilities. So 19% of our population are people with disabilities. The older we become, the more likely we acquire disabilities. So you can see after age 80, 75% of people have disabilities, whereas under the age of 20, only 6.5% of people have disabilities. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about that 56.7 million figure. Which disability do you think is 50% of that figure? Deaf or hard of hearing, correct. Okay, how about 25%? I heard somebody say C, that's correct. And that covers people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, brain injury, and psychiatric disability. How about that 6% figure? Correct, blind, okay, low vision, and 2%? Wheelchair users. Now, isn't that interesting that all the signage for disabilities is wheelchairs? Why? Because when only 2% of people with disabilities use wheelchairs, it's a very visible disability. Okay. As you see, most disabilities are not immediately detectable. Okay, most disabilities are hidden disabilities. And that's really important when we talk about service animals later, how somebody that appears to be healthy will come in and they'll say they have a service animal, and you don't detect a disability. So we're going to talk about how you can't ask them about their disability. Okay, we're going to show a 33-minute video, Getting It Right. We released this nationally on August 1st of 2008 and 2009. It won International Film Festival awards. It is kind of corny. We want to try it and teach you about disabilities through humor. So we'll go ahead and feature 6 disabilities. We'll talk about this a little bit after the video. Thank you.
I tell you, look good in purple.
Thank you. You do. A little feminine.
Ned. Ted. Jeff.
Ted.
Hello, Beth.
Ted?
So, anyone know what's on today's agenda?
That's a training on political correctness. Just what I need to occupy an hour of my morning.
I hope they use puppets instead of people. I love puppets. What? Puppetry is a very beautiful and ancient art form, dating back at least 30,000 years, and sometimes they hit each other with sticks. Come on! Everybody loves Punch and Judy.
Anyway, I hear we're doing something about handicapped people today. Is that?
Oh, I know all about working with the handicapped. I work with you, don't I?
That's funny. That was good. That was really good. Ned, if you keep talking like that, I'm going to put you into a wheelchair, okay?
Oh.
Seriously, does anyone know anything about working with the handicapped? You know, I always get a little freaked out when I see them. Maybe this training might actually help.
Well, me too. Although they don't freak me out nearly as much as clowns do.
You know, I heard you're not supposed to touch their helper dogs. Yeah, don't really know why, but they could be trained to attack.
They should attack clowns.
I know you're supposed to talk louder and slower to deaf people, right? Or is it blind people?
Neither one. You're supposed to talk louder and slower to people in wheelchairs because they're so much lower than you are.
I wonder if the training will cover how to work with mentally handicapped. That way it might help me figure out how to work with you guys.
No. Oh, you guys ever seen Edward Scissorhands?
I love that movie.
Do you think Edward would be considered handicapped?
Why? Because he has scissors for hands?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess if he didn't oil them, the blades could get rusty. And even then, what would be the problem with that?
Well, you could end up with a haircut like Beth's.
Here's a politically correct question for you guys. If a person who can't see is called blind, and a person who can't hear is called deaf, and a person who can't talk is called mute, what do you call a person with no taste? Ted.
Oh, I see what you did with the...
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming to today's voluntary diversity training, especially since I know this is the last place you wanted to spend your morning.
I don't know that I would say it's the last place.
I would.
Well, my hope is that by the end of this session, you'll agree that our time together was worthwhile. Who knows? You might even learn something. After all, diversity training covers a lot of ground. Today, we're going to cover some civil rights issues facing the country's largest minority group, people with disabilities. So before we get started, are there any questions?
Would there be a quiz?
No quiz.
Well, then why do we need to do it?
Like I said, people with disabilities make up the country's largest minority group, with over 54 million people. And it's the only minority group that any of you could someday become part of. Let's say Ted and Beth go out to lunch today after this meeting.
Yeah, like that's gonna happen.
Okay. Let's say Ted and Ned go out to lunch today, and Ned wrecks the car.
Are we in the company car?
No, Ted. It's Ned's car.
No, I just want to make sure that we're not in the company car, because we're not supposed to use the company car for lunch, and I don't want to have to do like a company car training session.
You're not in trouble, Ted. But because of the wreck, you become a wheelchair user for the rest of your life.
Thanks a lot, Ned.
But the point is, you could become a person with a disability that easily and that quickly.
I don't see anything easy about it.
As for the rest of you, if you live long enough, there's a good chance you'll acquire at least one disability. In fact, almost 75% of all people over the age of 80 live with at least one disability. What I'm getting at is this. At some point, you will interact with people with disabilities, whether it's a coworker, a customer, or even someone in your family. I know lots of people try to avoid dealing with people with disabilities because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And while it's okay to feel uncomfortable, you should remember that people with disabilities are people first. So it's better for everyone involved if you have some basic guidelines on how to deal with those situations, rather than always trying to avoid them. And that's why we are here today. First, I'm going to show you a few short scenes involving people with disabilities.
Excuse me.
Yes, Ted?
Ned would like to know if there are going to be any puppets involved.
Puppets?
Puppets are actually a very ancient art form, dating back, what, 30,000 years?
And they hit each other with sticks.
No, Ted. There won't be any puppets. Just people with disabilities going about their daily lives. These scenes will give you some basic guidelines on how to interact with people with different types of disabilities. They might even make you laugh. The scenes, not the people. After we're done, we'll have some Q&A. Is everybody ready?
More than 54 million Americans have a disability. So, talking about disability etiquette makes a lot of sense. Mastering disability etiquette is about managing your mindset, altering your attitude, getting past the PC, and coming to a shared understanding of who we are and what we want from one another. Here are some ways to move beyond the things that make us different and learn to appreciate the bonds we have in common.
Well, you don't see this every day. You better call the school nurse. What happened, Rock?
I taught him a lesson.
A lesson?
Yep.
What kind of lesson?
Kind of lesson they'll never forget.
I see. Better not touch that, Mrs. Gladstone. We want to follow protocol here. Look, Rock, I believe in experiential learning as much as the next underpaid public bureaucrat, but don't you think this is going a little too far?
I was just taking it to the real world, sir.
If our parents get wind of this, we won't have a leg to stand on.
How could you have done such a thing, Mr. Turgidson?
The spirit of scientific inquiry.
But you're a PE teacher.
Well, it was more like a dare.
A what?
I dared him.
You dared him?
All right, I double dared him.
You double dared them?
Okay, I double dog dared him. You satisfied?
Freezing metal, wet tongues. I can't believe they fell for it.
It's a talented and gifted class.
Figures. You are a cold man, Rock. Cold.
What do people who use wheelchairs have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. Wheelchair users are people. Never lean over them as if they were furniture. It's rude.
Look, Rock, I believe in experiential learning as much as the next underpaid public bureaucrat, but don't you think this is going a little too far?
Don't push or touch a person's wheelchair. It's part of his personal space and should be treated that way.
Better not touch that, Mrs. Gladstone. We want to follow protocol here.
When addressing a person in a wheelchair, be polite. Meet them at eye level.
A what?
I dared him.
You dared him?
All right, I double dared him.
Don't be afraid to use common or familiar phrases like, we won't have a leg to stand on, or he's a stand-up guy. People in wheelchairs appreciate common phrases just like everyone else.
If our parents get wind of this, we won't have a leg to stand on.
How could...
Be courteous. Don't patronize people in wheelchairs. Treat them as you would anyone else.
You are a cold man, Rock. Cold.
Other things to remember. Assistive devices such as wheelchairs or crutches are considered part of someone's personal space. Don't move someone's equipment without their permission. Don't park in accessible parking spaces unless you have a permit. Allow those who need them the use of accessible features such as restrooms and elevators.
So we're supposed to be kind of like playing around. And
Right.
then, like,
What is the problem, people?
Jake says that the blocking is all wrong.
Wrong!
That's what he says.
Wrong how?
Don't look at me. Ask Mr. Ed over here.
Jake?
I tried to tell you this 100 times, the lighting and the blocking.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it for me? Quiet on the set! I'm supposed to be a stallion. Equine god. But the way the lighting is hitting me, I feel like a horse's... I get your point, Jake. How about if you and Muriel change places and we start the action at stage right? Would that help you at all?
Hey, watch it, Pokey. You put an eye out.
Don't you make me come down there, and I am not kidding. If Pete hears about this, we'll all be in jail.
Know what people with a speech disability have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. A person with a speech disability may be difficult to understand, so give them your full attention.
Jake!
I tried to tell you this 100 times, the lighting and the blocking.
If you don't understand, ask the person to repeat himself.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it for me?
A quiet environment often makes communication easier.
Quiet on the set!
Treat those with speech disabilities the same way you'd like to be treated.
Hey, watch it, Pokey. You put an eye out.
Don't you make me come down there, and I am not kidding.
And remember, the ability to communicate effectively is serious to all of us. Other things to remember. If you're not sure exactly what someone has said, Repeat back to him what you thought you heard him say. Allow someone with a speech disability to finish her thought. Don't assume that you know what she is going to say. You may need to ask someone to write down what they are trying to say. Never pretend to understand what someone said when you did not.
Sonny Blackstone, I got some Kung Pao chicken walking in the dough, brother.
It smells like lunch is here.
Yes, sir.
All right. What you looking at, boy?
That's some axe.
Yeah. Yeah, you play?
A little.
All right. What's your name, son?
Josh.
Sonny Blackstone.
I know. I've been listening to your music my entire life.
Your entire life, huh?
Pretty much.
All right. So you got a favorite?
Song?
Yeah.
Well, it's gotta be I'll See You When I See You.
Yeah. That's right up there with Mess With My Dog, You Mess With My Head.
That's a good song.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Definitely an excellent song.
All right. Yeah, you know, there should be a guitar right over there next to you. Go ahead, pick it up. You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go then. Oh, yeah.
What do people who are blind have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. When speaking to someone who is blind, identify yourself by name. Shake hands if offered.
What's your name, son?
Josh.
Sonny Blackstone.
I know.
Speak in a normal voice and tone. There's no reason to shout at someone who is blind.
I've been listening to your music my entire life.
Your entire life, huh?
Pretty much.
All right.
Don't worry about using common or familiar phrases like, I'll see you, or watch this.
Well, it's gotta be I'll see you when I see you.
Never pet or distract a service animal. They're working animals, not pets.
Mess with my dog, you mess with my head.
These animals have been specially trained to assist their owners. Distracting them could disrupt this ongoing training. Distracting an animal could also pose a safety risk if its owner is unaware of an outside force influencing his or her animal. Other things to remember. Let someone who is blind know if you're leaving or walking away. Offer assistance, and if it's accepted, follow the given instructions on how to help.
That was a heck of a time, wasn't it, Carly?
I really lost it. The only friends I had after that last episode were the invisible ones in my head. Thought my dad was gonna grow a beard and move out of town.
He was just worried about you, that's all.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I thought God was talking to me.
This is good, right?
I sort of miss it.
It'll happen again. I'm sure of it. Only now that you're back to feeling like your old self again, the conversation will make more sense.
You think so?
Cross my heart.
You know, I'm really glad you were there, Pastor Lee. Talking to you made all the difference. I know it helped my dad, too. He says he's personally recommending you for sainthood.
We're just glad that you're feeling better.
Call me crazy, but if it weren't for you, I'm not so sure I would have made such a quick recovery.
So, how's the new job going? Is your boss treating you well?
I'm pretty sure my boss is a jerk, but just in case that's the drugs talking, let's just say I'm enjoying myself.
Good. That's the way it should be.
Amen.
So, what do people with psychiatric disabilities have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. One of the main obstacles people with disabilities face is other people's attitudes. So be supportive. Treat them as you would anyone else.
That was a heck of a time, wasn't it, Carly?
I really lost it. The only friends I had after that last episode were the invisible ones in my head.
Their disability may affect their ability to feel, think, and relate to others. Characteristically, people like this are not dangerous.
I thought God was talking to me.
This is good, right?
Sort of miss it.
It'll happen again. I'm sure of it.
In a crisis, be a good friend. Stay calm and supportive, and ask what you can do to be of help.
You know, I'm really glad you were there, Pastor Lee. Talking to you made all the difference.
Treat people with psychiatric disabilities as individuals. Respect them as people.
So, how's the new job going? Is your boss treating you well?
Other things to remember. Show respect. Listen and extend basic courtesy. Don't make assumptions about someone's limitations because of any disability. Don't gossip about anyone's disability. Attitudes are still the greatest barrier that people with disabilities face.
Hey, hurry up, babe. You're gonna miss the end.
Hold on, the pasta's almost done.
Just leave it. It'll be fine. You're studying to be a doctor, not a chef.
Are you kidding? I hate soggy pasta.
Sean, you're missing it.
I'll be right there.
Do you need a hand?
No, I'm just waiting on the Alfredo sauce.
Yeah, I killed her. Now I'm gonna kill you. Won't have to worry about you again no more.
Well, you missed it.
The one-armed man did it.
How do you know?
Just a lucky guess.
What do people with prosthetics have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. Treat people with disabilities the same way you treat everyone else.
Hey, hurry up, babe. You're gonna miss the end.
Offer assistance, but don't help unless your offer is accepted. And hey, don't worry about using familiar phrases. People with disabilities use them too.
Do you need a hand?
No, I'm just waiting on the Alfredo sauce.
Extend and accept common courtesies, just as you would for anyone else. And remember, people with disabilities are just like the rest of us.
Well, you missed it.
The one-armed man did it.
How do you know?
Just a lucky guess.
Other things to remember. It is perfectly acceptable to shake someone's prosthesis or hook. It is also okay to shake someone's left hand. Don't stare at someone with a disability. It could be considered impolite to ask someone, especially a stranger, about his or her disability.
Too much Harpo. Too much Harpo marks. Not enough Marcel Marceau. Here, try this. But remember to use your wrists. Not bad, But remember, it's all about story. We're talking the fragility of life here. You know, butterflies and lions. Pluto's downgrade from planet to dwarf planet. You hadn't heard that? Me either. Thanks, but I'm allergic. That's it for today. Practice up and remember. Mime is money.
What do people who are deaf have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you would treat everyone else. Speak directly to the person with the disability, not to their companion or interpreter.
Too much Harpo marks. Not enough Marcel Marceau.
Don't obscure your face when speaking to someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. Seeing your face can help him better understand what you're saying. Speak in a normal voice and tone. Never shout. If the person is wearing a hearing aid, it will calibrate to the normal voice levels. Don't worry about using common or familiar phrases like, "You hadn't heard that?" People who are hard of hearing or deaf use common speech, just like the rest of us.
You hadn't heard that? Me either.
Other things to remember. It is okay to tap someone who is deaf on the shoulder to get his or her attention. Don't eat or chew gum while speaking. It can make lip reading more difficult. Also, never assume that someone who is deaf reads lips. Only a small percentage of people who are deaf lip read fluently.
So, does anyone have any questions?
I have one. You always say people with disabilities instead of disabled people or people with handicaps or the disabled person. What's up with that?
Because people with disabilities are just like you and me. They don't like to be labeled or defined by their disability. For instance, I'm sure you'd rather be known by your name, not just labeled the bespectacled person or Mrs. Magoo, wouldn't you?
Sure.
When you put the person first, you're using what's called people first language. And it's just simple courtesy. Everybody wants to be thought of as a person first. Also, the term handicapped is considered very derogatory by people with disabilities.
Yeah, but if that's true, then why do they have handicapped parking spaces and handicapped restrooms?
Let's think about that. Do those terms even make sense? Can a parking space or a restroom be handicapped? They don't have a disability. It's better to refer to those things as accessible.
So, accessible parking spaces and accessible restrooms?
Exactly. You should also avoid terms like wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. People use wheelchairs just like you use your legs. They're not tied to their wheelchairs with ropes or caged in them.
Yeah.
Here's another. You don't say someone is suffering from blindness or some other disability.
But I hear news reporters use those terms all the time, especially handicapped.
You're right, they do. But that doesn't make it right. Disability rights and disability advocacy are relatively young fields. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was just signed into law on July 26, 1990, whereas other civil rights legislation has been around since the mid-60s. Our hope is that, given enough time and training, reporters and everyone else for that matter will treat the term handicapped like they do the N-word and stop using it altogether.
You know, a lot of what we're talking about just seems to be common sense.
Exactly. It's said that the best advice can be summed up in 5 key words: common sense and good faith effort.
That was 6 words.
I don't count and, Ned.
Oh. Okay, I have another question. What's the big deal about asking a person with a disability if he needs help? I mean, why not be a good Samaritan, jump in, and seems like we're creating an extra step here.
Another good question. As we've learned, people who are deaf or blind or use a wheelchair are just like you and me, independent. Most of the time, they can get along just fine without any help at all.
But what if it looks like they're struggling?
You know, it's okay to ask if you can help. That's just common courtesy. Just don't go freelancing.
All right, I get the part about the terminology, right? People first, disability, not handicapped, yada, yada, yada. And all right, it makes sense to ask someone before helping them. But I don't really get this whole touching part. Why is everyone so touchy about being touched? I mean, why is it a problem that I put my hand on someone's wheelchair or I'm petting their dog?
Well, for one thing, it's you doing the touching.
I'm serious.
Hey, Ted, you weren't paying attention. They covered all that in the video earlier.
That's okay. We can expand on it. The wheelchair or the service animal is part of their personal space. So touching their chair or their dog is like touching them. And you wouldn't want strangers coming up and touching you, would you?
Remember, this is Ted we're talking about.
The other part of the answer deals with safety.
Safety?
Sure. People with disabilities depend on their various aids for mobility, and touching them when they're not expecting it could inadvertently cause an accident or a distraction.
Huh. I never really thought about that.
But that's my point. Most people don't think of it in those terms. Which brings us to another fundamental point. Relax and be yourself.
Unless, of course, you're Ned or Ted.
Hey, we resemble that remark.
What I'm getting at is that you should talk to a person with a disability the same way you speak to someone without a disability. Talk to the individual, even if they use an interpreter. And as a general rule, you shouldn't pry into how the person got their disability. It's no different than avoiding personal questions with coworkers.
So you mean I shouldn't ask Beth what happened to her hair?
Okay, here's my problem. I just get a little freaked out when I meet a person with a disability. I mean, of course, not as badly as Ned gets freaked out by clowns, but...
It's true, I do.
Beth, yours is actually a pretty normal reaction. It's just human nature to be uncomfortable with unfamiliar situations. Hopefully after today, you'll feel a little less uncomfortable the next time you meet a person with a disability.
I hope so too.
You will. Especially if you remember to think of them as a person first.
Okay, how about a hypothetical?
Ooh, someone's been using their word of the day desk calendar.
Look, if I have a friend who's got a disability and she tells me she wants to go skydiving, what should I do?
Ned, doesn't that seem a little far-fetched?
Not really. Despite what you might imagine, people with disabilities participate in all types of sports and physical activities.
Actually, I think Ted was referring to the fact that Ned might actually have a friend of the female persuasion.
Thank you, Beth.
No problem, Ted.
You guys mind if I finish my question?
Go ahead, Ned.
Thank you. What I was going to ask is, what do I do if I have a friend who uses a wheelchair and she tells me that she wants to go skydiving? You know, shouldn't I advise against it, you know, for her own safety?
No more so than you'd advise Ted not to skydive.
Oh, I'd tell Ted to skydive, I just wouldn't tell him to use a parachute.
My point is, people with disabilities are the best judge of their own capabilities. If this friend of yours thinks she can skydive, who's to say she can't?
That makes sense.
The same holds true for everyday social functions. Let's say the company is having a summer picnic where there's a pool everyone can use.
We're having a picnic?
With a pool?
Cannonball! Woo! As I was saying, don't assume that someone can't swim just because she has difficulty walking or may be blind. If you tell everyone else to bring a swimsuit, be sure to tell her too.
Well, it's like that old adage, don't assume because it makes a donkey out of you and me.
What?
I don't like to curse.
I know what you mean, Beth. So to sum up, there are really just a few key things to remember when it comes to disability etiquette. 1, terminology. Use people-first language. No more handicapped or wheelchair-bound. 2, ask before you help someone. It's just common courtesy. 3, relax and be yourself. Use common sense and remember the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And 4th, don't make assumptions because, as Beth said, they make a donkey out of you and me. People with disabilities are a unique minority, the only minority in the world that each of us, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, age, or cultural background, might one day join. So by striving to treat others as equals today, whatever their disability, you're helping to make the world a better place for all of us, even for Ted. But I'm not sure about Ned.
Hey.
Just kidding, Ned. Thank you all for coming this morning. Call me if you have any questions.
Thanks. Thank you. Oh, that wasn't so bad. I think I might have actually learned something.
Well, like she said, it's common sense.
I was saying that because she's a woman.
Oh, yeah, right, Ted. That's why I'm saying it, because she's a woman. Yeah.
We're going to go back to the PowerPoint in a minute, but what I failed to mention a little bit earlier is, once again, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed on July 26th of 1990, so it's only been around for 22 years. I wanted to briefly touch on what the Americans with Disabilities Act covers. There are 5 titles. Title I covers employment, and that's for private employers with 15 or more employees, or state and local government employers, regardless of number of employees. The Title II covers state and local government entities, which would be Pikes Peak Library District, so you're a Title II entity under the ADA. I talked about state and local government entities. Notice I didn't say federal government. Federal government is not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's the Rehab Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Title III covers public accommodations, which are private businesses. Title IV covers telecommunications. If you look real closely at your phone bill, you notice you're paying 12 cents extra every month on your bill. That's to cover Title IV of the ADA, telecommunications, for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, who have a speech disability, or who are blind and have low vision. And Title V are the administrative portions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the ADA covers very little, and people with disabilities sometimes assume that the ADA covers everything because they happen to have a disability. So once again, I wanted to emphasize that the ADA only covers a few things. If we could go back, okay, we have this now. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, true or false? Just a few review points of the video. The largest barrier for people with disabilities, other people's attitudes, is that true? Absolutely. Okay. We need to be more conscious of the language that we learn and the article that you have, and then there's a really nice poster there through University of Kansas Lifespan Institute. It's the second page, it's the green poster. It has some good examples of inappropriate language and appropriate language. So much of the time when we correct people, we tell them what not to do, we don't tell them what to do instead, so we want to give you some, the desired responses there. Okay? We're going to treat everybody as an individual. We don't want to ask about somebody's disability. Okay? In fact, the ADA prohibits you asking about the nature or extent of somebody's disability. Okay? And those 5 words are so important: common sense, good faith, effort. Okay? True or false? Ask a person before assisting them. Absolutely. I have a colleague who uses a wheelchair, and if somebody just runs up to the door and gets it for her, she talks to them about how I have dignity, I'm independent, I want to be able to have the opportunity to open the door myself. So if you see a person with a disability, don't just automatically try to assist them. Ask them if they do need assistance, if they appear to be struggling, and then wait for them to instruct you what you need to do, and then follow those instructions. Okay, people with disabilities consider their wheelchair as part of their personal space. Is that true? Absolutely. It's an extension of their body. Okay. True or false? Stand when conversing with somebody who uses a wheelchair. False. What should you do instead? Eye level. You can pull up a chair, especially if you're going to have a lengthier conversation. People with wheelchairs always have sore necks because they're always having to look up at people when they're standing. Okay. When having difficulty understanding, it's unacceptable to ask somebody to write down what they're saying. False. Okay, sometimes that really helps. And I wanted to bring up a point too. How many of you have written back and forth with somebody who's deaf? Okay. What were your impressions? Okay. Yes.
Well, I had a positive experience, and the person, the deaf person wrote first, and wrote, "I am deaf, this is what I'm looking for." And it was just, it was so nice that the person initiated that, because then I didn't have to wonder or be concerned about doing something offensive.
Wonderful. What did those? A lot of you have written back and forth to somebody who's deaf. There's a large deaf population in Colorado Springs. What was your impression about their written language? Yes.
It's not a very high level of English.
Okay.
Frequently, it's kind of like communicating back and forth with maybe a third grade writing level, and the grammar's different.
Very good. English is a second language to people who are deaf that are educated in the state school for the deaf. Their word order is subject, object, verb. They don't use affixes. They don't use articles. So instead of I am going to the store, they would write me store go. Unfortunately, people who are deaf are misjudged. People think, well, this person's not very bright. They don't write very good English. No, that's not lousy English. It's written ASL. And always to bring the point home, I always talk to people about how my mother's Japanese. She moved here from Japan. She had to learn English as a second language. American people who are deaf that were educated at the state school for the deaf are going to have limited English proficiency because English is a second language. So now that you know that bit of information, you're forced into an advocacy role to let other people know that no, that's not lousy English, that's written ASL. English is truly a second language to people who are deaf that use ASL as a primary language. ASL meaning American Sign Language. Okay. Those of us that are getting older, everything seems to be slowing down on us, so we might need more time. Short-term memory is the worst thing for me, I know, and I have an excuse. Those of us that are aging, we do have an excuse. 80% of learning occurs between birth and age 8. 20% capacity remains in our brain after age 8. So that's why we older people can remember things a long time ago, but what just happened or what we were going to say, we forget because our brain is already full. The longer we live, the more information there is in our brains, the less we can accommodate that new information. And I learned that bit of information when I went to a training in the 70s from Sylvia Hyde. She's a world-renowned neurologist. So those of us that have those senior moments, which a lot of people find that term offensive, personally I don't, we do have an excuse. We just cannot, our brains cannot accommodate new information, okay? Number one important thing, especially, if you're writing back and forth with somebody who's deaf, don't pretend to understand if their written ASL doesn't make any sense. Ask them some more questions so that you can get the intent of their communication, okay? Always, it's fine to ask somebody to repeat what they say or to ask them to say one word at a time. Sometimes people with disabilities talk really fast and it's hard to understand because the words run together. So to ask them to slow down, to use one word at a time is perfectly okay. You can also paraphrase what they just said, put it in different words just to make sure you're understanding, to get some acknowledgement from them. Okay. True or false, don't attempt to shake hands with somebody who has a prosthesis. False, okay? That prosthesis is an extension of their body, so that's their actual hand. Okay. Another thing, people with intellectual disabilities, sometimes people treat them as children rather than adults, and it's really important to treat people as their chronological age rather than their developmental age, where they're functioning, okay? True or false, all people who are deaf use sign language? False, okay? 90% of children who are deaf are born to hearing parents, only 10% to parents who are deaf. So children who are raised by parents who are hearing, believe it or not, most hearing parents who have children who are profoundly deaf from birth do not learn sign language. If they do learn something, they learn how to fingerspell. So their kids don't want to go home on those weekends because nobody in their family can communicate with them. So not all people who are deaf use sign language. Kind of hard to believe, but true, okay? Look at and speak to the interpreter rather than the person who is deaf. False, okay? As an interpreter, I always ask people, have you used a sign language interpreter before? They say no. So I set the ground rules with them. You want to face them eye to eye and have a direct conversation with them. Instead of saying, tell him, because as an interpreter, I'll say, tell him. If you say that, use I, me, first person. That's very important. So directly address the person with the disability, okay? True or false? All people who are deaf can read lips. False. Only 30% of sounds can be seen on the lips. Vowel sounds are very easy to lip read. Consonants are very difficult. Okay, like p and b. Exactly the same mouth movement. One has voice, one doesn't. Those are nasal sounds. You see no mouth movement. You feel the vibrations on your nose. Okay. Okay, I think that we covered that. Gently tapping somebody on the shoulder to get their attention rather than grabbing at them. And approach them from the front if you need their attention. One of my friends who's deaf was in a grocery store and suddenly somebody was shoving her. And she was stunned. It's like, why did this person shove me? Apparently they said, excuse me, trying to get by. She was deaf. She didn't hear them, so they shoved her to get her out of the way. So make sure if somebody's profoundly deaf that you're in their line of vision trying to get their attention by waving, or you can reach out and gently tap them to get their attention. Okay? It's unacceptable to use common phrases. Do you need a hand? Did you see that? Did you hear that? True or false? False. Okay, figures of speech. Everybody uses the same language. Like a person who uses a wheelchair. Yeah, I walked over to the library during my break. Okay? They don't say I wheeled over to the library. They use that term walks just like we do. Okay? Relax and be yourself is so important. True or false? Parking places reserved for people with disabilities should be called handicapped parking. Okay, that was probably a big thing everybody in here learned today. What do we call restrooms or parking instead? Accessible. Okay, even though the H word is used on the signage, it is considered to be a derogatory phrase to people who have disabilities. Okay. All right. These are just common sense kind of things. If there's an accessible restroom and you go into the restroom and you see somebody with a disability come in, you're not going to use that restroom even though that stall is wider and it's easier for all of us. The person with a disability has the priority for that, and we certainly don't want to park in their parking spots. That's another issue. Remember earlier we were talking about how most disabilities are invisible disabilities. Okay, so sometimes you'll see somebody pull up in that parking spot. Well, they don't appear to have a disability. If they've got that placard, then they've been cleared to have that parking spot, and we cannot ask them about the nature or extent of their disability. Okay, refer to the person rather than their disability first. True. Okay, so a person with a disability, not disabled person. And once again, we don't want to use the H word, very derogatory. Okay. And the language that we use definitely projects how we feel, about people with disabilities. So now that you're aware of person first language, you can, gently talk to other people who use the H word or something like the R word, okay? Retarded, okay? There's a federal law now called Rosas Law. It is illegal to have that R word on any federal document, okay? It's an unacceptable derogatory term that is not used. Another big thing is when you're entering or leaving a room, if somebody's blind, you need to tell them, because they could be talking thinking you're still in the room and you're not there. I talked to an ophthalmologist in Salt Lake City a few months ago, and he said, most of the people I work with are blind or have low vision, and all these years I've been practicing, I never really thought about telling them I was leaving the room. So, not a common sense thing. Okay, you do have a copy of this poster. I do have an order blank over there too. The University of Kansas Lifespan Institute, they put out this wonderful poster, and you have a PDF of that in your handouts. And also they put out a really nice, concise booklet, and there's a copy of it over there that you can read in 10 minutes, and it gives you all the important points you need to know according to what disability you're dealing with. Okay. All right, let's review, like I said, the last time I was here, we talked about service animals, and it wasn't really talked about a lot in the video, but let's talk about that since you do have quite a few patrons that come into your library branches that have service animals. True or false? It's okay to pet service animals. False. Okay, they're working animals, they aren't pets. If you really, like, I love animals, I always want to pet them. If you want to pet the animal, you always ask the person who uses the service animal if you can pet them first, rather than just reaching out and petting them. Once again, it could cause an accident or injury if you're distracting the animal in any way, and the person with the disability doesn't realize that you're distracting the animal. Okay, their role is to assist the person with the disability. Let's talk about different service animal scenarios. Okay, the law says that a service animal is any dog that is individually trained to perform a specific task or tasks that's directly related to the person's disability. Okay, a person who's blind might use a service animal for orientation and mobility. Somebody who's deaf might use a service animal to alert them to auditory stimuli. Somebody who uses a wheelchair might use a service animal for orientation and mobility, help pull them, okay? A person who has allergies, okay? And this isn't an individually trained, it's an inherent trait in some animals. They can detect the presence of allergens, even though they're not individually trained to alert somebody who's allergic to peanuts and somebody's trying to give them a cookie with peanuts and the dog gets in the way and to alert their owner that they can't have that. Because the task or tasks are directly related to that person's disability, that would be considered a service animal. A person with a psychiatric disability, if they're trying to come into your library with an animal and you ask them, is this a service animal because of a disability, or what task or tasks is this animal individually trained to perform on your behalf? They say, well, I'm bipolar and having the animal around keeps me calm. You can deny access there because that animal is not individually trained to perform a specific task or tasks for that person. But if they say the animal can detect when I'm becoming agitated and the animal nudges me to prompt me to leave the environment, that's an individually trained task. Or the animal reminds me that it's time for me to take my medication, then that would be considered a psychiatric service animal. But not just an emotional support animal or a therapy animal, you can deny access. Another example of a service animal where there hasn't been individual training, but is considered a service animal, is a seizure alert dog. People that have seizures, that animal can detect in advance that biochemical change that occurs in somebody's body before they have a seizure. That animal is considered a service animal, even though that was an innate ability. The task is directly related to the person's disability. Okay. So those are examples of service animals. Okay, true or false? ADA says that a person with a disability can take their service animal everywhere. False. Okay, only where the public is permitted. Okay, so if you go into a restaurant, they can take the animal into the restaurant with them because the public's allowed there. Can they take the animal in the kitchen? No, the public's not allowed there. Okay, or somebody that's having surgery, can they take their animal in their hospital room? Yes, because the public can come and visit them. Can they take them in a surgical room? No, that's a sterile field. The public's not allowed in there, so the service animal would be denied access there. Okay. The ADA states that any trained animal can be considered a service animal. No. We already talked about how the law specifies since March 15th of 2011 that we're talking about a dog. The only exception is a miniature horse. If that horse has been individually trained to perform a specific task or tasks that's directly related to the person's disability. Okay, true or false? Next one. Okay, libraries may require that service animal owners provide proof that the animal is a service animal. False. You cannot require that the animal has a harness or a leash or something that clearly identifies them as a service animal. You or I can get on the internet and purchase one of those vests, you know, to put on our pet and say that the animal's a service animal. Okay, so you can't require papers. There's only 2 questions that the law says that you may legally ask. Once again, number 1, is this a service animal required because of a disability? Or what task or tasks is this animal individually trained to perform on your behalf? Those are the only questions that you may legally ask the person. Okay. You can also not charge a surcharge. You can't ask them for, a pet deposit, or in the library that would not apply. Okay. What else did we want to talk about? I think we covered all of that already. Okay. Libraries may deny access if the animal's not housebroken or out of control. True. Okay. The law specifically says that the handler has to have control of the animal, and that the animal must be housebroken. If somebody comes in and their dog defecates on the carpet in your library, the next time they try to come in with the dog, it's like, no, you can't bring the animal in here because the animal is not housebroken. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
About the leash. How does that correspond with the leash laws that are, it says there that we can't require that the animal be on a leash, but the city requires that, so how does that?
You can require that the animal be, on a leash so that the handler has control, unless they have severe cerebral palsy or something and they can't hold the leash. But you can't require that that leash identifies them as a service animal, that, it's printed saying, I am a service animal, do not pet me. But yes, you can require that they have the animal in their control if it's safe for them to have that animal, on a leash. Like I said, some people, their dexterity is so poor that they wouldn't be able to handle it. So they have to have some kind of control over the animal, either verbally, visually, so the animal's not out of control. One thing that's important to mention too, service animals are highly trained animals, so you wouldn't see a valid service animal urinate or defecate, inside your library. I've sat in conferences with people who are blind that use service animals for like all morning long, and lunchtime they take their animal out. The animal holds it until they go outside to a grassy area, and the person with the disability needs to clean it up. Okay. True or false? The ADA states that dogs being trained to become service animals are considered service animals. That's false. The ADA does not address service animals in training at all. However, Colorado state law says that a service animal in training is to be treated as a service animal. So let's take a look at that. The ADA is a federal civil rights law, and then there's the state law. There's a conflict between the 2 laws. Which law do you follow? The one that provides more access. So even though the ADA does not address service animals in training, the state of Colorado law says that that is a service animal, so you're going to consider it a service animal in Colorado, okay? Even if it's just being trained. Okay.
Same thing applies to them. If they're not housebroken, you can tell them?
No. Under no circumstances would you permit a non-housebroken or out-of-control animal. So if that person brings their service animal in training in, the animal's not in control or not housebroken, you can deny access. And the handouts there, I copied and pasted the changes to the law as of March 15th of 2011. So you can see there, it talks about how those 2 are necessary under any circumstances, okay? Another thing is, we have employers call us all the time. My employee uses a service animal as reasonable accommodation, and several of the people in the office are allergic to dogs, okay? Can we say she can't bring the service animal? No, you cannot. You need to create your environment so the people who are have allergies or are afraid of dogs sit far away from that person so that they don't have contact, don't cross paths with that service animal very frequently. One big part of the Americans with Disabilities Act talks about direct threat. And it's really easy for us to make assumptions about disabilities. We'll meet somebody with a disability, and the next time we see somebody with the same disability, we're going to assume that that person's the same. Absolutely not. People with disabilities are as individual as people without disabilities. So what we need to do, if we're determining that that animal is a direct threat, we need to look at the individual circumstances. We don't make generalizations based upon our previous experiences with people who have disabilities. You need to look at that individual situation to determine whether or not there's a threat. Okay, and I did put the number there of the state of Colorado law, if you want to look that up and print it, the rights of persons with assistance dogs, and that's where they talk about service animals and training in the state of Colorado are considered to be service animals. Okay, there's some of the resources and the links where you can find that poster that you have. There's an order form where you can order quantities. I think those posters are only like $3 a piece. That booklet is absolutely wonderful. You do have a copy there, and I can send you a PDF link to that if you'd like to read it. Like I said, it takes only 10 minutes to read. That's why I like that booklet the most. There's United Spinal Association has a really good disability etiquette booklet, but it takes longer to read. And as we all know, time is the most precious commodity. So actually, that's the link there to the booklet already up there. Okay, next. Okay, and then I brought copies of our disability etiquette poster. The one on the left is for adults, the one on the right is for children. It comes accompanied with a CD-ROM with lesson plans in case you're ever doing any, trainings to children that come to the library. And the next slide talks about service animals and the most recent guidance. Now, I did bring copies of the booklet. It's a 29-page booklet. Like I said, there's several laws that affect people with disabilities. The Fair Housing Act rules and regs for service animals are different. The Air Carrier Access Act rules and regs are different. That 29-page booklet, and there's a copy of it over there, and there's the link. It's available in English and Spanish. Talk about the different laws and how they differ as far as service animals go. And the revised requirements are in your handouts. There's the link so you can print more of them. And we're happy to come and, like I said, all the trainings we provide are customized. These are some possible topics if you want us to come back to do any trainings. You can ask for anything you want, but those are some possible ideas. Okay. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to give me a call. My colleagues and I are there from 8 to 5 on weekdays, and we're happy to answer your questions and assist you in any way. Like I said, the security department at Pikes Peak Library District is who we get the most calls from. It's because of those service animal issues. So we like being the bad guy, we do have to be impartial, but we're happy to talk to your patrons who are arguing with your security, saying, no, I can bring this animal in here because I'm bipolar and the animal helps keep me calm. Then we can talk to them about how the ADA states that the library, which is a Title II entity under the ADA, that you cannot bring this animal in because they're not individually trained to perform a specific task or tasks on your behalf that's directly related to their disability. Any other questions before we say goodbye today? Thank you so much. Oh yes, I'm sorry.
What's the law indicate if a public entity asks the wrong questions? What's the
Well, they can
right?
go ahead and file a discrimination complaint against you to the U.S. Department of Justice, which is the enforcement agency. It would take a long time to get closure on that. I've heard it taking at least up to 27 months to resolve a discrimination complaint before. So, they could file a complaint against you, but it's not going to be resolved for a long time. I think the key is for all of you to make sure that all of your staff in your branch are aware of these things. Just having the booklet handy and maybe just passing it around for people to read, that 29-page booklet, and every once in a while just reminders, or for them to know there's 2 people in your branch that are already trained on this matter. You come to the training. If they have any questions, to go to you, and then you can always call us if you have any additional questions. But I love that booklet. It's really good guidance. And like I said, there's also a Spanish version, and I brought both. Yes?
So we have an accessible room where we have all different kinds of software for people. And when we show somebody where the room is, if they're blind or visually impaired, is it appropriate to say, do you want to hang on to my arm, or do they follow with, their stick and stuff, or what is the best way to approach that?
You can say, I'll show you where the room is, how can I assist you in getting there?
Okay.
And then they'll tell you, well, I like to hold your shoulder, I like to hold your arm. You know, they might want to reach out to see how tall you are, because that might determine if you're a real short person, they'd want to hold you here. If you're a tall person, they're so, you know, just asking them how you can assist them, they'll give you the directions. Every person with a disability is unique. They're all going to have a different guidance for you.
Okay.
We've had a couple of situations where our people encounter a patron with a dog, or in some situations we've had one lady brought in 2 dogs, and they ask the first question. That's kind of a gimme. On the second question, sometimes we encounter difficulty. It's none of your business. We don't want to, that's my life, that's my privacy, you can't ask me that question. Any thoughts on how to take it from there?
The Americans with Disabilities Act says that we, as a Title II entity, we can and we are permitted to ask you 2 questions. Is this a service animal required because of a disability, and what task or tasks is this animal individually trained to perform? If you can't answer those questions, then the law says we can deny access. We just need more information because it appears you have an invisible disability. I'm really glad you asked that question, because we've had people with disabilities call us before saying, I have 2 service animals. One's trained to pull my wheelchair, and the other one's trained to alert me to seizures, okay? Then both of the animals are allowed to come in because of that individual training. However, if one of them keeps them calm and the other one pulls their wheelchair, the one that keeps them calm can be denied access because they're not trained. Like I said, the only exceptions I can think of where there wasn't training, it's an innate ability, but it's related to the disability or presence of allergens and before seizure activity.
I noticed the changes in the law that came about in 2011. I thought they were pretty drastic, actually.
Yeah, because dog, before people say, oh, I have a service cat. And I'm a cataholic. I love cats, but you could never in a million years convince me that you could train a service cat. And we had a lady that called just a couple days ago, how can I certify my bunny to be a service animal? And it's like, the Americans with Disabilities Act clearly states that under no circumstances would your bunny be considered a service animal. Besides, certification is not required by the law. So if you had a dog, nobody could require certification papers or proof.
Do you ever see any of these little miniature horses?
Not too frequently, but yeah, they're used. Yeah, and the housebroken thing is especially important in a horse because if they defecate on your carpet, it's going to be a huge pile compared to a dog. So I just don't see them that often, but they are used quite a bit. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, here at the library we have groups of people come in with severe mental disabilities, and usually they're with a caretaker. But sometimes we're approached and we're asked, I would call it questions that are a bit unreasonable, or sometimes just ask the same question over and over again. And if we're asked a question that's kind of unreasonable or inappropriate, would you say that we should seek out the care provider, or should we handle that question as we would any other question and try to do it for that person?
Yeah, the ADA is all about equality. So, I would encourage you to treat the person just like you would treat any other person. I'm a patron. I don't, disclose a disability. I come in and I'm yelling the F word in your library. Then what would you do? You would ask me to leave? So you would ask the person with the disability to leave, because it's totally unacceptable for somebody to have that kind of behavior in your library. So I would deal with that person directly. Now, if the caretaker comes up and tries to assist you to intervene, then you can address them, but you should try to deal with the person with the disability first. The law says that you can't require somebody with a disability to bring a caretaker with them. So, like I said, if they choose to become involved, or if the situation's really out of hand and you're not familiar with that person and don't know how to deal with them, and that person happens to be there, yes, you can ask for their assistance, just like if I came in with a parent or a relative. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the law cover as far as employees for a service dog? Is there a whole eligibility or requirements kind of thing if it's a staff person?
Title I of the ADA covers employment, and people can use service animals as a reasonable accommodation in the workplace if, that animal assists them with tasks that are directly related to their disability.
And the employer rights as far as what they can ask, is there documentation, or is it just, is this service dog necessary, and if they say yes, then that's it?
As an employer, you can ask for documentation from the physician if there's potentially any problems, like, people who have allergies say, well, I can't have a dog in my environment. And it's like, well, we'll have to separate the two of you and sit you far away, because fear and allergies are not valid reasons to exclude the animal. But you can ask for documentation in the workplace because it's a reasonable accommodation. Title I says any reasonable accommodation, you can request documentation and require that. So service animals would be no different. Yes.
We're in the process of looking at renovating a building into a new public library. It's been unoccupied for quite some time, and actually I don't think it was ever open to the public. Is it possible to have your people help us with a walkthrough audit?
Absolutely, our consulting department does that. And the 2010 standards, as of March 15th of 2012, just this year, the 2010 standards are totally different and updated. So yes, our consulting department would be very happy to do an accessibility audit of your facility. I mean, we can give you checklists, but perhaps you might not know exactly what you're looking for.
I think I even discovered recently that ADA can even cover carpeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. So please feel free to, Kent Kelly, Kent, K-E-L-L-E-Y, is our Director of Consulting Services, and please feel free to contact him to ask him. Like I said, Meeting the Challenge does that, so there is a fee for the accessibility audit, but we're up to date on the 2010 standards, so we would be able to assist you with that.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, one topic that might be good to have us come back to talk about is effective communication. Actually, under Title II, it's called equally effective communication, and sign language interpreters and large print and those kinds of things, those auxiliary aids and services, I think would be very helpful to all of your staff in the future. So we'd be happy to come back and do that training in the future. Any other questions? Thank you so much for spending your morning. We're a phone call away or an email away if we can assist you in any way. Thank you so much.